How are you doing, Marwan?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for sitting with me through all the computer shenanigans, the things that computers do when you don't ask them to do.
No
I really
worries.
appreciate your time today. As I mentioned to you in email and just in person, the library, beginning tomorrow, April 3rd, we are launching a 21-day racial equity and justice challenge. My intention with the 21-day racial equity um, discussion and the justice discussion was to cause us to think a little bit more about the connection between equity and justice, and to think a little bit more about what might be our role in justice and the part we might have in bringing that about. So each week there's a different topic: education, housing, health, and then the topic we're here to talk about today is transportation. So I really appreciate your time. I have a few questions. We're going to try to keep it short, but I'm thinking from the way our pre conversation went, this might be a two-parter. So for those who are listening, I'm going to say something to indicate the end of the brief part of this conversation, and then if need be, we'll go deeper. And it's a choice for folks to stay on longer.
All right.
That works for you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Cool. So what we've been doing as we started these conversations is I've been asking folks to share a little bit about themselves, um, and then also share what brings you to this work. So we're talking about transportation equity. I know you do all the things everywhere all the time, but in this situation, I'm talking about transportation equity.
All right. Well, I'm Marwan Cameron, and for those that don't know, I'm the executive director of Gather Together, Grow Together. And the main thing that we do is transportation. And so you can think of us as a ride share or a cab company that operates here in Kitsap County. What brings me to this work is a little bit of background on me. I came to Seattle in the third grade, so I was 9, and within 2 years, I would be able to ride public transportation from the Central District all the way to Rainier Beach by myself. And so, transportation from a equitable standpoint, even an 11-year-old can navigate. Now, it was a different time. Now, I wouldn't put my 11-year-old on a bus by herself, but back then, we could do that, right? I went to a private school in the CD, but we lived in Rainier Beach area, and I took my siblings on the public, transportation to St. Teresa. And so just having that flexibility, that accessibility, we call it the number 7, which came basically every 10 minutes. As I grew into a young adult, I worked downtown, the graveyard shift, cleaning, doing custodial work in the big buildings downtown, and I can catch the bus to work, and for 11 o'clock shift, and I can get home in the morning, and so that's was such a culture shock coming here to Bremerton and seeing the lack of equitable transportation, right? And so when I came here, I was a student at OC, and my family was living on this side and they were kind of spread out throughout Bremerton, and if I wasn't ready to go home at 7 p.m., I had to walk. And so I'm walking from Olympic College all the way to Illahee, which is where my father lived at the time, right? And I did that for a while, but again, coming from a big city, you walk and you catch the bus, right? If you miss a bus, you walk, start walking to the next stop. Usually we would just walk to the next stop and hop on. And so for a while, that was fine, but that becomes an issue, especially for the BIPOC community and those that are low income, because time is really that greatest resource to me. It's not money, it's time, and so you lose so much time out of that. And when you think about how, especially Black folks, are disproportionately impacted, if they're experience you know things from the justice system, being unlicensed, and I'm talking about myself right now, right? I've been an unlicensed driver. I've driven on a suspended license and worried about being pulled over and getting a ticket. And once you get that first ticket, then and that's a $500 ticket back when I was in my 20s, right? For whatever the infraction was that I got pulled over for, and then having the suspended license, right? That's 500. So now you can't dig yourself out, but you still have to go to work. So you're driving on a suspended license. Folks not being able to afford, driving their kids to school, not being able to pay insurance when I was in my 20s. I didn't pay for insurance, right? It was just the mindset was, why do I need to pay for this if I don't have to have it, right? I'm just going to be careful and I'll be all good. So not only did I not have insurance, but I also was driving on a suspended license. So when I would get pulled over, it would just compound. And for years in my 20s, I didn't have a license, right? And that's quite the risk. Also, people don't really think about how other factors impact that. So if you are under child support, right, because you're the non-custodial parent, if you are, behind, they can suspend your license, right, because you're not uh, up on paying your child support. But people don't consider the fact that, hey, that non-custodial parent still has to pay rent and do all the other things and survive and live. And there's just so many hours in a day, and many times folks are low income, and so those are many of the issues that I saw. And then being here in Kitsap County and no bus service on Sundays, the bus ending at 8:30 on weekdays. Right now, we have a youth who is a junior in high school, and he works for us in our computer lab. His shift has to end at 6 p.m. because he has to be on that bus by 6:30 to get to John Carlson, right? So what does anyone else do that lives on John Carlson that has to pay rent up there? So that's what really kind of brings me to this work.
Man, you said so much that resonated. I grew up, so let me say, I grew up in New York, and I think my kids think I'm exaggerating, but I was on a train, my brother and I, by ourselves, probably by the time we were in third grade.
Mhm.
Like, now you see trains. I mean, folks is afraid of the rats, never mind people. So, so that brought back memories of being on the train. What I will say will stick with me forever as part of this conversation is that for people of color, you were speaking specifically about Black folks, but I'll say for people of color and people who are on the periphery,
Mhm.
time is their greatest resource. I have to say that because that is so true when you think about how much time is spent on public transportation, getting to, using, and then connecting from bus, train, whatever, to your destination. How much time is spent on public transportation? Now, did you say buses are running on Sundays now, or they are
No,
not?
no. They will come, I believe, November.
But
It's
right
gonna.
now they're not running.
They're not, and they haven't for
Okay.
years.
Okay. Because not because of COVID though. Prior
No,
to that.
no.
Okay.
This has
Yeah.
just been something that the citizens here have been pushing for, and we'll talk about it later because
Okay.
I'll
Sure.
address it.
Sure. Um. So you already took us down this road, but if you would tell us a little bit about your current work and your advocacy around transportation equity. I mean, we're already going down that road. So continue. Continue.
Sure. So, I live here in Kitsap County. I love it here. It is slower, so you kind of take the good with the bad. But I started at Olympic College as a adjunct professor back in 2012, and I taught at all three campuses. So I taught in Bremerton, Shelton, and Poulsbo, and so the way that it is set up, right? Students can be in all three classes and you would just video stream it out in live streaming. The problem was that's not equitable. So the students didn't have access to the faculty. They didn't have access to me, right? And so I was one of those faculty members that drove. I would rotate every week and drive to each campus so those students would have the benefit of seeing me. And that's really important because, well, technology, right? We saw it today. The cameras would go down, the internet would go down, and now Shelton and Poulsbo just wouldn't have a class, but the Bremerton students would benefit from it. And so while I was sitting or teaching at Olympic College, one of the other things that I also taught, and why this is so important to me, is I'm a non-traditional student. I went to the ninth grade. I got my GED 2 days after my 16th birthday. I'm an OC graduate, but I didn't step foot into a college until I was 24, right? And so I've taught a lot of non-traditional students at Olympic College. So folks that are single parents, folks that have been justice impacted, coming out of jail or prison, folks that are just trying to make it, and they're just going back after high school, or if they even graduated from high school. And so college can be very difficult, but the stakes are so high, right? And the problem is when that happens, folks got to get off campus and take care of their kids. They got to go to work. They've got to, they're counting on someone else for a ride. They might be sharing a vehicle. There's all types of things that are going on. But the problem is that education piece is the thing that's going to lift them out of their situation. But you're taking them away from that resource, right? So now they're not there with the advisors. They're not there with the counselors. They're not there with the computer lab. They're not there with the IT lab, right? And so I wanted to create something where students would be in, and I was seeing that my students were missing class, right? Because they couldn't get their car fixed. They couldn't get a ride, right? And then they had to go. Some students were leaving early and coming late. And so those were some issues. And so the nonprofit that I run now, I had a smaller organization that I was able to build inside Olympic College. So G2 is the steroided version of Steps to Success, which I ran at the college, right? And so I would cook, and folks would come and eat professor spaghetti in the class, and it was just designed for non-traditional students to be able to stay at the campus and utilize those resources and work amongst each other, right? You have a car, but you have, the math skills. So you can help me there, right? You're an older person. So you already went through the kids in diapers, and you got a new parent, right? And so you got those synergies there, and just trying to put those folks together and build their own community. And so that was really the beginning of my advocacy work around transportation equity and making the campus a place for non-traditional students and those that were transportation tran transportationally challenged to have a space where they could be there and get the resources and things they need in order to change their life. Back in 2018 is when I left OC and started my own nonprofit, which was Gather Together, Grow Together, and transportation was the first thing that we addressed. And talking with DSHS and some of the other social services, transportation and childcare were two of the big things that were huge gaps here in this community.
I just learned so much about you, Marwan, and I thought I knew all there was to know, but that just taught me that I had to ask better questions. Um, and you talked about this advocacy work that's really interconnected around housing and employment and childcare and all of those other things. So we'll talk about that a little later, maybe as part two. You could expound on that a little bit, but
Sure.
I think that might take people to a different place as well, right? So this
Mhm.
idea of transportation equity and all the other paradigms or dimensions that we might be thinking about are very intersectional. So to have housing means that I have stability, but I also need transportation so that I can get to work. I need a job that pays well so I can keep my house and pay for transportation. So all of those things. We'll talk about that later. But what I wanted to ask you, because you'd share some links with me and staff will be able to see that. What struck me when I was looking at the links and just kind of perusing it two or three times over is that transportation, for some reason, is not usually what comes to mind when we think about equity. We don't often think about where transportation falls in that. Like I can tell you, for example, the idea of building houses, apartments, whatever, that are near transportation lines makes complete sense to me, but it baffles other people.
Right.
Like, oh, I didn't think about building these houses near a road that would actually have buses or um, in any case. So talk to us a little bit about why that might be. Why do people not put transportation and equity together? And I would say if you would go further and share with us, where might justice be at work or where is it needed when we talk about transportation for marginalized folks?
So I'll give you 3 reasons why, it doesn't usually come to mind. One, many people have access to equitable and accessible and frequent transportation. You yourself said, "Hey, I came from New York," right? I came from Seattle. So we're coming from other places where we have been socialized in that, right? And so when we come here, especially in our adulthood, we're probably in a different stage in our life where we have transportation now, so we're able to get to where we need to go. Second, many people, especially middle to upper class, are often the decision makers, right? They grew up with both public and private transportation. Many of those same people, they started driving in their sophomore and junior year, right? So they're used to just being able to get up and go, or again, being in a metropolitan area where they can, get around however they need to. And then lastly, probably the saddest reason is unfortunately many times those of us from you know a lower class financially, or even in the BIPOC community that didn't have equitable transportation, they forgot, right, what it was like. And so now that they have made it, they've arrived, and they're now these decision makers. Some folks have the attitude of, well, I did it, so they can, right? And I see that a lot when doing a lot of advocacy work. People are so quick to forget how hard it was when they were going through, and how there weren't any supports there, and whatnot. But then when they they've transcended and they've made it through the fire and they're on the other side, and now they're the decision makers. Now they're looking at the people coming behind them, and they've kind of pulled that ladder up. They're saying, well, you're kind of lazy, and if you really want it, you just need to work for it. And so that's really kind of that last piece of it, that I see. So it's like I did it so they can attitude. And so then they shape the politics, they shape the policies. There may be systemic racism that's built around that in the form of redlining or gentrification or even environmental equity, in regards to the pollution, right? So that's one of those things, moving us toward the freeways and all those things that kind of come with that, that impact our Black and minority communities are all contributing factors to that.
I don't think it really occurred to me well, it has occurred to me, so I take that back, but I wasn't aware of this, that there are communities all across the country that intentionally build houses in communities, like create communities where there is no public transportation. Like they actually vote to not have public transportation come through their area. That baffles my mind when
Mhm.
I first heard of that. Like who wouldn't benefit from transportation? Like who wouldn't benefit from having a bus line or some type of tram or something like that? But so that was an awareness to me that that was actually intentional for a lot of communities. And you mentioned earlier your Sunday services. My mom was a frequent public transportation user. She did not drive. We came from New York. Like if you had a car, it was like a thing. Because there's public transportation everywhere, right? All
Yeah.
the time, 24/7. So when we were here, she used, public transportation, and she would always, and it would kind of irritate me actually, take the bus to go somewhere on Sunday. And it was like, Mom, the bus is gonna stop running by 3 o'clock.
Mhm.
You know it is.
Right.
And I always used to wonder, like, why do they do that? They know people are still needing to get from point A to point B. Why do they stop running the bus at 3? But anyway, that's a tangential type of thought that came to mind. But so when we
Well,
talk about go ahead, go ahead.
and let me just say, one prime example is, again, I grew up in Seattle, and so you've got Rainer Avenue that goes from Rainer Beach to the CD, and then you have ML King that goes the same length. And on ML King is where a lot of Black folks and minority folks lived. And when they wanted to do the light rail, what they did was they displaced all those businesses. So many of those business owners that were minorities, they went out of business, right? Because it took years for that to come in. And then once that got in, the gentrification happened, right? And so now Black folks got pushed away from the light rail, and now they're out. And so it's like, hey, we put it here, and we were making it equitable, but then there's that other impact because now it's too expensive for those same people to live there. So I just wanted to add that in there.
I think in my very limited experience, that's a model I think that's obviously been duplicated in many cities as well across the country,
Mhm.
where um, folks are displaced in the name of creating better transportation, but all it really does is disproportionately, you used this word earlier, disadvantage folks who are marginalized in some way. And I think we've seen it in a lot of communities. Again, it's because, as you said earlier, folks are invisible to it, this idea of transportation and equity, and putting it together. So we're going to talk more about that, but I wanted to know from you if you would talk more about, for us, what's needed to achieve transportation equity. So either from like a systemic perspective, behaviorally, or even attitudinally. You've been sharing some things about the being invisible to the issue, but if you would share more about, what's needed from us or from systems.
So, I'll look at it just right here, right? Because this is Kitsap County. So when you think of Bremerton, Port Orchard, Silverdale, kind of the hub, right? We need matching Bainbridge and Bremerton ferry routes with 95% on time, ferry runs, right? Right now, Bainbridge, it it runs, it runs, it runs, it runs. Bremerton can't seem to run, right? And so that's a huge issue that needs to happen. Bus service also needs to be synced to every ferry run. So while they are going to bring back very limited Sunday service, they also need to link that bus service, right? If a ferry comes in, the buses need to run the route of the county so that people can actually take advantage of that, right? In case in point, we have a lot of folks that work at concessions for the Seahawks games and other places. And when they get home on that last ferry, there's no public transportation. They got the ferry. So now what do? They got to catch a cab, which costs a lot of money, right? Or they have to rely on a family member or a friend that they may not have, right? Everyone doesn't have that. And so people don't realize that. We need equitable public transportation services, just like the shipyard has take home buses and carpool programs, right? These are the folks that make primarily, really good money here in the county, right? Aside from our hospitals and things like that, right? But they have specialized service just for them to get around. But we don't have that for those that actually really need it. And again, time is the greatest resource. We need extended night routes. We need extended weekend routes. And we need to execute a needs assessment for our riders and create a strategic plan around that. So when you're sitting in these meetings and these board meetings, look and see who's in those meetings, right? It's other leaders and things like that, but it's not usually those with the lived experience, right? That can say, hey, this is what's happening. I have a transportation company. I'm the executive director, but 4 nights a week, I take a lady to work graveyard shift at a gas station. Now she's in her 60s and has a cane, right? And her rent just went up $300. She's barely making it now and has a roommate in her 60s, right? You got a roommate because you can't survive on your own. And so, but to catch a cab, it would cost her $30 one way. Well, that's $60. The bus doesn't run when she has to be at work, and the bus doesn't run when she gets off work. So that would be $60, right? 4 days a week that she works. Now, at that point, she's kind of defeating the purpose of going to work, right? And so that's one of those issues. From a county standpoint, we need more transportation and equity around Seabeck and Gig Harbor and Polsbo and kind of those outlying areas, Fox Island, and all those areas. We need more transportation equity connecting Key Peninsula and then also to Tacoma and Seattle, right? There's not a lot of jobs here, so folks are going to have to commute out, but they need to be able to get back in to the county so that they can do what they need to do. So we have that community needs assessment that just came out, and that's all well and good, and that's great, but it's not super targeted for transportation. But that data was showing, I think Tony Ives from KCR was talking about this, that one of the second most things that was talked about was transportation in that community needs assessment. But some questions need to be formed there to say, hey, what's going on? Why haven't we had Sunday service for all this time? Well, the answer to that question is, well, the ridership doesn't, it costs so much, the demand's not there to justify it, right? But again, you have all these place-bound people that need to get around, right? I need to go to the laundromat. I need to run errands. I need to go to worship service. I need to do all these things, and I can't do it if I don't have a car. So it just makes it really difficult. So those are the things that need to be done just kind of immediately here. I think Kitsap Transit and other advocates need to come together and again, just really talk to the folks, do some surveying, make sure that your hubs of people and apartment complexes do have that. Why not have maybe you have the take home ferry for uh, the shipyard. Maybe you have one for major apartment complexes at least to you know get folks around, right? What happens to the folks that work at Applebee's and get off at 11 p.m.? All the places that we like to go to at night or in the evening, and we complain like, oh, Bremerton shuts down at 10. Well, they got to because the workers can't get home. So those are some of the things.
I've heard that complaint before, and that makes absolute sense. Like the people who are working there more than likely need a ride, and if there's no public transportation, then it makes no sense to be open that late.
And think
And
about the stress on relationships, Lucretia. So now you're depending on a ride from a family member or someone that's like, you got some gas money? So now you're giving them gas money, or you have to wait 2 hours to get a ride, or you got to ride with them everywhere they need to go. Like, I'll take you, but you're going to ride with me because I ain't coming back to come get you. So now you're out of your house 3 hours before you need to be at work just so that you can get that ride, right?
And that was my situation that I was, referring to with my mom is that my brother and I, but me in particular, I tended to be her ride to get to and from. And there were times where it caused tension because it's like you were not part of the plan for today. Like I had other things to do, but now I have to come and get you. And then so that we don't have to do this again, where are we stopping? We gotta go to the store, we gotta go to the pharmacy, we're gonna do all the things because if not, then you won't be able to get there. And there were times that I had my daughter in the car and in her car seat. So it was a long day for everyone involved. I mean, I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to do those things and I had the wherewithal. But it wasn't like I was, living large. I still had a car that liked to smoke and, you know, it didn't know that smoking was not good for its lungs. So it would smoke and break down and do all, you know what I'm saying? Do all those things because she didn't have, transportation. And then when she was, as she became less mobile, like her body just started to age and slow down. And she had to take access, it's the access bus, right? That you take if you need, and that's even more restrictive. Like if you're not there when they say that when you're supposed to be there, then they leave, you gotta call, make an appointment. It's just a whole, I get that they are hoping their intention is to create structure, but it was very stressful.
Yeah, you got to call 2 days in advance. And, I think paratransit, because there's access and then there's para. So one of them, you have to go around while they pick up other people, right? Again, your pickup time could be, you'll get to your appointment on time, but you might be going on a ride through the city until you get dropped off. And it's the same thing on the way home. That's your whole day for one appointment.
Right. So I appreciate this time getting us to the point where we're talking about transportation equity and we're clear about the importance of transportation equity. So for staff who, are joining for just the first 20 minutes, I want to let you know that this is the end of the 20 minutes. And we're going to continue part 2. So if you want to do part 2 at some other time, you can stop the recording here and come back. But we're going to continue the conversation into part 2. So for part 2, maybe we'll hang out for another 15, 20 minutes, Marwan.
You got it.
Okay. So one of the things I think, as I was thinking about the topics for 21 Day Racial Equity and Justice, there was a lot of topics. Let's just say there were a lot, but I wanted to keep it to 4 weeks. And I thought about how intersectional all these domains are: transportation, education, housing, health, economic, environmental, like all of it is interconnected in some way. I don't know if that's something that you've always thought about, but you did allude to that when you talked about your work with Olympic College. I wonder if you can share more about that. What is it that folks might be missing sometimes that they don't see that interconnection? Remember, housing, transportation, when we don't see that. So what are folks missing, and where do we go to? What should we be thinking about so that becomes like a default way of thinking for us?
So I'll give you an exercise and then I'll go into it. So I tell folks to close their eyes, right? And I want you to imagine that you're a new mother and you got your car seat, you're going to Olympic College and you don't have any transportation, you don't have you may have family, but your family is not it's not healthy for you to interact with your family. So you're alone. So you've got to get your baby ready. You've got to get yourself ready. You got to make sure that you've got diapers, you've got bottles, you've got I mean, if you're pumping, then you got to have your pump. You got to have your books, right? You got to make sure that you have everything. And we did this when we first started G2 with the single mother. It was 45 pounds total for her books and the car seat with the baby. Now you've got to get out the door. You've got to walk to the bus stop. You have to wait. Well, this is Washington. So right now at this recording, it's pouring down rain. It sounds like hail out here. Um, so it doesn't matter. You've got to walk. Now you can take breaks, you can grab a stroller, but that's another thing to pack, right? Now you get on the bus. You're lugging all this stuff on. You get on the bus if you're coming from Port Orchard, right? You're catching the bus from Port Orchard down to the ferry. You got to catch the 10-minute ferry. Get off the ferry, you're downtown, you've got to get on another bus. Then you finally get to the campus. You get off the campus, and if your daycare's at the campus, well, that's a blessing because you could drop your child off at daycare, and then you can go to class. Now, if you get there and you realize that you forgot something, you can't go back. So if you forgot your homework, if you forgot your paperwork because you needed to go to DSHS after that, well, that's not going to happen for you. And unfortunately, it may be another 3 weeks before you can get that appointment. But you needed that appointment because that was contingent upon you getting resources that you needed for you and your family, right? And so you really have to be thoughtful about everything. You don't have the luxury of you hop in your car, and this happens to me all the time, right? I get to the first light and I'm like, oh, I done forgot my wallet. Oh, I done forgot this. And I spin back around, I run back in, and I grab my coffee mug, my travel mug, right? That I'm so blessed I can turn back around just to get my coffee, right? Oh, she better pack her coffee too, because she's not about to, get off the bus, go to Starbucks, get some coffee, and then get back on the bus because the bus is leaving. Now she got to wait, right? So that's just an exercise that I want people to think how this is interconnected. I want you to think about what people champion, right? You hear, oh, housing prices are out of control. Homelessness is an issue. Jobs is an issue, right? Race, LGBT. You hear about all of these issues, and all of these things are important, but transportation is never in there. It's never talked about in there. And again, for me, I believe time is the greatest resource. And so folks that are reliant upon public transportation or being able to afford private transportation, right? When you were talking about smoking, I thought you were talking about the car, right? So, we're riding
No,
on
I
a
was talking about the car.
Oh, you were, right, right. So
Uh-huh.
so the engine light's on, but you got to keep driving because you can't repair it, right? You can't. You're driving on bald tires. It needs an oil change. And when it breaks down, the repairs are huge, right? So now you're driving. It's dangerous. Again, if you get tickets, then you're taking the back roads. Folks know about that Tracington run. Because you're not on the main road, right? And so all of these things kind of play a role in that. And so while people are trying to do everything they can to pick themselves up, right? And again, we this caveat that folks put in there, to no fault of their own. You hear that during election time, right? Because those are like the good people when it's not their fault, right? So it doesn't matter whether or not you put yourself in that situation or you were born into that situation. You are trying to improve your situation. DSHS, Auto Center Way, Olympic College, West Bremerton, right? Social Security Office, Silverdale, right? To get to these places, you are all over the place and you can't possibly get these things done. And it takes time to get a certificate. It takes time to get a degree. It takes time to get your birth certificate. It takes time for these things to be done. When you get a job, it takes time for you to get a raise, right? You're working 2 jobs. And so, a person that doesn't have well, it doesn't even matter if you have an education now. You might be at Starbucks with a master's degree. But regardless of that situation, there are folks that have to work 2 jobs, right? So how do they get to the other job? How do they take care of their family? How does the non-traditional or the non-custodial parent, not only provide for their child, and many non-custodial parents want to do that. I'm one, right? But then at the same time, they still have to keep a roof over their head, right? So how do they do that? And so what is told to them is, well, you just need to be more responsible. Well, my child that I love is here, but I still need to be able to survive, right? So we have to do something about that. So I think that's the way to think about just how important transportation is in your life and how privileged you are if you have access to a vehicle or multiple vehicles where your kids can hop in their own vehicles, your significant other can hop in their vehicle and go and just do what you have to do. You can pay your insurance. I don't look at how much gas costs. I just go to the place where I like to get gas, doesn't matter what the price is, and I put the gas in. That is a privilege. There are people that's putting in $4 and they're going to figure it out later, right? I'm going to get $5 from somewhere else and I'm going to get home, right? Those are the things that I want people to consider. And so folks are working hard and you've been on the bus all day, you've gone to school, you've done all the things, and now you're home. You still got to cook dinner for you and your kids, or even if it's just you, right? You still have to study, but you're tired. Oh, you need to study on the bus. I'm trying, but the bus is doing this and the pages are bouncing. I don't know if you try to read on the bus. It can be difficult. Well, you can't really write on the bus, so all you can do is read, right? You're getting distractions, you're on and off, all these things are happening. So I think empathy and just being cognizant of how this ecosystem all works together, for folks to change their situation, especially for those that are just as impacted as they're coming out and they're fighting from behind everyone else that's already struggling, trying to keep pace and saying, hey, you're doing it with little to no resources.
The thought that came to mind as you were talking about the process of the day, like the young woman, the person on the bus, the thought that came to mind, and actually I started to feel, was stress.
Mm-hmm.
I started thinking about how people are stressed chronically every day because of things like transportation. And it might not be a big deal to other folks, like you say, who are blessed, myself included, to have transportation, but the stress of the process, of the stress of if I miss the bus, the stress of if the bus is late, the stress of the bus is going to get me home dark, and then I got to walk home from the bus stop in the dark with stuff in my hands. The stress of that, I imagine, I know wears on the well-being, of individuals who are impacted in this way. So I think that's another, I don't think people have that consciously at the forefront of their mind when we think about stress, like what kind of stress people are under, particularly when we talk about equity. But we know that the lack of equity, inequity, creates that chronic stress for folks, whoever they might be. And it definitely is something that as organizations, institutional leaders, myself included, taxpayers, politicians, decision makers, maybe even patrons and users of these services should be thinking about, as you said, the ecosystem, and that the ecosystem isn't just about what did you say? You said flexibility and accessibility and frequency,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also about how are we impacting overall health? How does health come into play?
Well, and nutrition is a big one, right? So if I'm doing all that and I'm technically probably living in a food desert, right? If you think about, I live in an apartment complex in Lions Fields. What grocery stores are down there?
Right,
none,
right.
right? So what choice do I have? Oh, you tell me I need the I need the food prep. When am I supposed to do that? You know what I'm saying? Well, I got to get all these. Yeah, yeah.
Especially when I think about, like, okay, so we're getting to health equity,
Mhm.
especially when we start thinking about eating healthier. We all need to eat healthier. I'm not denying that. But eating healthier and having fresh whatever it is, and then meal prepping. But what am I supposed to do with it? Because I like you said, I have it in my bag for the hour that it takes me to get to work. It ain't fresh no more. It's not fresh anymore. So yes, I think about all that. Look, when I was riding a bus as a teenager, I remember you couldn't eat food on the bus. Is that still the same?
I think folks eat on the bus. I mean, you probably ain't going, you might not have soup on the bus, but eating a sandwich or or whatnot. I
Okay.
think you
It
can.
used to be where you couldn't eat on the bus, and I
Mhm.
remember eating and having, somebody tell on me and say they're eating on the bus. But I think about things like that. Like you said, time is our greatest resource. And if that time is what I'm using to eat, do homework, make a couple of calls, oh my gosh, there's no privacy. So stress comes to my mind. Like, at least for me, I would be stressed. And I would imagine those who have lower tolerances for that type of situation would have a great deal of stress as well.
Well,
And then,
Lucretia, how do you break the generational cycle of that, right? So if my grandparents were poor, my parents were poor, and I was poor, and we all kind of grew up in that situation, then we're eating a lot of box food, a lot of processed food, a lot of frozen food, a lot of McDonald's, things like that, right? And so we're just in survival mode. And so whatever's handy, whatever's quick, that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna get home and throw a DiGiorno pizza in the microwave, right? I'm gonna put a mic meal in the microwave because that's fast. That's what I got time for, right?
and it's interesting because the narrative that I often hear is eat healthy and use your time on the weekend to meal prep. And I'm not discounting any of that,
Mhm.
but the way in which you've talked about transportation equity, what it brings to light is that for folks who don't have access to that type of transportation, the transportation that gets them to where they need to be on time, they don't have a lot of time for all the other things like planning your whole Saturday to meal prep. Actually, I remember living in New York and Saturdays was laundry day.
Mhm.
And that meant we had to pack all the laundry in the cart and I had to walk down to the laundromat. And then I was in there all Saturday washing clothes. I hated that. Hated
Ooh,
it.
the garbage bags, 10 garbage bags of laundry in at the laundromat for like 5 hours. You
Yeah, you
got
were there
7
all day.
machines running.
Yeah, you were there all day.
Mhm.
So that takes into account so many other things. So I don't know if there was anything else that you wanted to share, but I do want to say thank you for making it comprehensible to talk about transportation equity, to think about the entire ecosystem. I want people to hear me say and repeat what you said, that when we talk about transportation, we are talking about flexibility, that everyone has a right to accessibility, everyone has the right to safety, that everyone has the right to, and mobility. So, this idea that if I'm not physically able to walk onto a bus, that there's a way that I can get to everything that I need, all the services, and not be encumbered because the system isn't set up to think about people like me, maybe in a wheelchair or in any other, encumbrance that might prevent them from fully accessing transportation like everyone else does. We haven't even talked about um, folks who have mental illnesses or are struggling with dealing with, I shouldn't say struggling with, but living with some form of neurodiversity,
Mhm.
and where that how transportation kind of acts as a barrier. The lack of transportation and the poorly designed transportation acts as a barrier for those folks. But maybe that's a part three, or you can answer now.
Well, so there was a question that you didn't ask, and one of them was, where's justice at work or needed? And when we consider the inequities in transportation for marginalized folks. And so, one, there are a lot of initiatives that are taking place. I consider Gather Together, Grow Together as one of those. You can look and see that, like, Orca now is free for the youth, so they can get on public transportation. That is really powerful. I did mention the limited route service that will start happening on Sundays. The fast ferry service is really a big service for folks that are here on the peninsula. There are agencies like frontandcenter.org. And then also there's the Washington Transportation Justice Agenda, which is a link for previous days in there. But some of those things that we didn't talk about is transportation is also sidewalks, right? For people that need to walk. Now, there's a lot of places in Kitsap, there may not be sidewalks, and they've got
You
those
are
big
so right,
irrigation
Marwan.
ditches on the sides, right?
Yeah, you're so right about that. Yeah.
You're starting to see some bike lanes put in, but we need more of those overpasses and crosswalks. People don't know, but BIPOC community is disproportionately killed and injured from crossing the street, right?
I didn't know
And so
that.
we don't even think about that, right? So how is crossing the street racist? So those are things we have to look at, right? So the reduction of transportation time. Are we looking at, if I live in Port Orchard and I need to get to Silverdale where most of these resources are and the hospital, how long does it take me to get to the hospital on the bus to go to a doctor's appointment? Just a
Exactly.
regular doctor's appointment, 3 hours, right? So it's a
Exactly.
6 hour day. Well, that's a day of work. I'm not on salary. I've lost a whole day's wages to do a doctor's appointment, right? Uh, and then we also have to get into the electric vehicle initiative. So as that kicks in and our government wants to phase out these, combustion engines, well, who can afford an electric vehicle? How are you going to charge your electric vehicle? Are you going to have the money to have an electric station at your house? Most low income people aren't. If you're in an apartment complex, you're not. And where this is already happening, folks are getting into fights, right? Because folks are leaving their vehicles on the charger and you're trying to find out who in the complex got their car on the charger because they need to take it off. Folks are forgetting to take their car off the charger. So now it's catching on fire. You know what I'm saying? And blowing the car up. But again, they're not going to put a charging station for every unit in an apartment complex. So now that becomes an equitable issue, and that becomes a time issue, and it becomes a money issue. So all these things we really have to think about, right? You talked about the mobility piece of it, long-term planning, air pollution reduction. The Regional Alliance for Resilient and Equitable Transportation is looking into all of those things. And so I just wanted to touch on that because transportation is more than just public transportation or cars, right?
Yes. Thank you for that reminder.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Boy, you leave my mind like on high. I'm like, my brain's about to explode just thinking about, and I mean, in a way it should, because it is rather complex. And you offered, for example, sidewalks. My mind didn't go there. Now I think about that often when I think about like how walkable it is,
Mhm.
but the connection, was not there for me. I've had someone, we talked about transportation, and they were, really in favor of bikes and really in awe of biking and using their bike everywhere. But the thought to me was, okay, well, everybody doesn't want a bike. They can't afford a good bike. And you have the whole locking it up, somebody stealing it, especially if your livelihood is depending on it. So really having a myriad of ways, which is what you're offering, a myriad of ways that we address the transportation equity issue is really important, and a conversation to continue to have.
Absolutely. And if you want to encourage things like that and you say, hey, we can get some synergies off of reducing pollution, getting folks, to exercise and to use different modalities of transportation, then incentivize and give, some kind of stipend for those that are, switching to a bicycle or using a bicycle, those that wouldn't typically do it, not kind of the gentrified, version of that, folks that are already going to, oh, I love riding my bike and I can ride my bike back and forth to work because I don't have young children at home. I don't have to go to daycare. I don't have to go over here, right? I'm not impacted that way, but incentivize people in a way to do that, but do not penalize them if they cannot.
Thank you, Marwan. Well, I appreciate your time today. I appreciate you making time for me and having this conversation. I have this sense that you could probably talk about this for a couple of more hours. We just don't plan it for, we'll plan that for another time.
Hey, this is just one aspect of what I do, right?
I know it is. I said you're everywhere all the time, doing all the things. I appreciate you, Marwan.
Thank
Talk to
you.
you later.
Absolutely. Bye bye.
Recording stopped.
Bruh,
Was that good?
your brain is just like, like, oh my gosh. I did not know